Good afternoon. Welcome back. This is I think, our third video that we're doing, interviewing all of our Capture and IDP conference speakers for the 2023 event. We have back with us Dave Gerber, who is VP of Technology M&A at the Quorum Group. And to the right or the left, or however Teams is going to record this, we have Paul Corman, who is president and CEO of Zamcar. Both of these guys are experts in the industry, and Paul's also been a long time partner, collaborator with Harvey Spencer, and has been at the event many times in the past. Welcome, both of you guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, bud. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. So I'm gonna start this off with, and I've not actually recorded one of these two speaker panels before, so we'll see how this goes. But so I wanted to open off with just sort of an open-ended, basically a softball question. What are one or two trends that you're seeing in the IDP M&A space that's not related to AI? And we'll allow Paul,
Yes.
my birthday brother, to
There you go.
to go first.
Sure. And I'll try to keep it on one Gemini personality, not the other. But I don't think trends are changing that much. I mean, to be very honest with you, what I see is people want end users want solutions to problems, and hopefully the participants in this industry provide compelling solutions to answer some mission critical applications that they have. Too often we hear technology, 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 but in the end user really has a problem, and the smart vendor knows how to solve that problem. And I think that we've seen that for many years. We see new technologies coming in, such as AI and RPA and other things to help solve the problem. But again, they're only pieces of the puzzle to solve a customer issue and a customer problem, in my opinion.
I agree.
You can't just agree, Dave. Anything to add?
I agree. I agree with Paul. One of the challenges we've always had in this space is technology. We tend to put the technology first instead of focusing on the customer's problem. Now, part of that's because customers have a hard time identifying problems that they can solve with this technology. It's a really challenging thing. But recently the question is the trends. What I see happening, I've talked about this last year, is there's this deluge of new vendors coming in, particularly in IDP, right? There's 400 of them now, guys?
It's a lot, yeah.
And the differences between them are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Ironically, the new ones keep saying how awesome they are, so much better than the ones that have been doing it for 25 and 30 years. And I'm still waiting to see how awesome, really. So we're seeing that, which then is going to lead to some other things. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit. But the trend is easier to get into than it used to be. And implementation times are getting smaller. Differentiation between the companies is getting smaller. So that's the trend I see right now.
So we were joking around with the idea, marketing lingo, and we've all been in marketing at various stages of our career. It almost sounds like it kind of becomes a marketing problem for how these companies are going to have to differentiate themselves going forward as the technology sort of coalesces around sort of a standard issue. It becomes more of a, how do you get your word out, or am I misinterpreting what you said there?
Well, I think that's certainly a piece of it, but marketing can overhype something also. I mean, we've all seen marketing telling it can do everything in the world, and you get it, and maybe it's somewhat limited. So it's really, I think, the trend we need to see and the need to continue to see is shifting the complexity away from the end user and to the vendor. The vendor needs to absorb all these new technologies and create compelling solutions that an end user can implement relatively easily. And that's definitely a relative term. And I think that's so it's critical. The vendor just doesn't have good marketing, but they have to have solid foundation that supports that marketing. And I think that's the biggest challenge we see. To David's point, and I think it's a good point, there's a lot of upstarts out there, new companies that do have some compelling technology. And sometimes for a larger vendor, it's harder to get that integrated into a platform that may have existed for 10 years. On the other hand, they need to do that in order to stay up to date and compelling. And frankly, that's one of the driving forces, as David will attest to, for acquisitions.
Yeah.
Let's make sure, instead of developing it on a 3-year cycle, let's bring it in and start reaping the rewards today, or however quickly they can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, Paul's exactly right. And I think my viewpoint of it is the IDP vendors for so long have been trying to be everything to everyone. I can capture everything from a cement receipt to an invoice to a oil and gas contract, right? And I think it's too much, especially for the smaller vendors. It's way too much. So I think what you're going to start to see is much more niche marketing into it. Well, we've seen it for a long time. Invoices.
Yeah.
I dare you to ask any IDP vendor for a demo, and I got 99 out of 100 is going to show you an invoice, guarantee, right?
Right.
And I
Yep.
want to say to them, we got it, guys. You can capture an invoice. Congratulations. So I would anticipate, and this is kind of along the lines like what you see TCG doing, for instance. They're really focusing. They can capture anything, right? But they're really focusing on high-end insurance companies, claims processing, workflow, right? You got the Ancoras of the world focused pretty much on invoices, right?
Yep.
I think you're going to see more of that. And the investors, by the way, like that, right? Because I can become very focused in a market as opposed to, no, I've got, customers all over the place. It depends on the buyer, but I think that niche is going to get them higher valuations, I think.
I wonder.
Absolutely. And in fact, and David, you hear it all the time when you meet a company and say, what are you looking for? The things we hear every time now: vertical market expertise, some real solutions, as you alluded to, David.
Mhm.
And the second thing is the king is recurring revenue. That
Yeah.
probably cloud, and
Yeah.
not necessarily maintenance, by the way. So you're absolutely right. It's
Yeah.
how to package this and sell it in a compelling way that I think is going to be the king. And
Yeah.
it's harder for a smaller company because, as you know, they may have a strategy to stick with a market, but
Yeah.
all of a sudden they have to make payroll. So that you've all heard the term
Yeah.
AFM. They
Yeah.
turn to an AFM company, anything for money.
Yeah.
And then they're diluted, and frankly, they lose valuation doing that.
It's okay to take on a few of those, but Paul's exactly right. You don't want to get yourself spread all over the place, and at the same time, you never want one customer concentration. Customer concentration can kill you as well. But perhaps my one challenge is on what I have seen is on the maintenance versus subscription. Right, the some of the buyers that I've seen lately, I was taking the same thing, like, it's not really subscription, it's maintenance. And two of them actually said to me, actually, we're fine with that. As long as it's
Right.
repeatable and profitable, I don't care,
Yep.
because there are just some applications that have to be, particularly in government, on-prem, right? User-based licenses, right? But everything Paul said, that's exactly right. I see this market going more into that area of we're going to be really good at this and maybe this, but that's it. If you want to do something else, good luck.
So curious about, you mentioned, I think, I can't remember exactly what you said, but you can capture an invoice. Great, we get it, right? But at the same time, there's some research that's come out that's like something like only 5% of finance processes are fully automated. Invoices are still very much a manual process. It seems to me there's still a lot of legs for investment in that particular segment of the industry, but it's still a huge, it's been the lowest and low hanging fruit for, so we talked about this last year. I mean, it's just there.
Well, Brian, yeah, and for one of the simple reasons that every single company pays invoices.
Right.
I don't care what kind of company. So what you might be able to do then there might be some concentration on your integration capabilities into certain ERP systems, because every single market, I swear, there's 500 conferences on ERP systems for everything from bakeries to cement companies and everything in between. So maybe you concentrate on a given, I know an ECM vendor concentrating specifically on the food processing market.
Mm-hmm.
It's big, right? So it's invoices, but it's other documents related to that. But the in for them was the invoices. So I think you'll see some of that as well.
The other question you both brought up the aspect of integration. Um, we can, for one of the first two Question Tuesday we did was with Christina Robbins of Digitech, and we talked about microservices. Do you as a trend, do you see microservices sort of? I'm not exactly sure how to ask this question, but how do you see that impacting the ability for a company to have a fully enabled sort of, you can mix and match their services? How do you see that in an M&A environment?
I, I think it's a key. I mean, I apologize. My head I already burned off one of these AirPods, but so I made the switch. I think David's exactly right. I think, when you talk about invoices, I'll get into your question in a second,
Mhm.
Brian, but the problem is I don't think this industry knows how to package it and sell it properly. I love to use the example. It's not a good one. It doesn't totally relate, but 5 years ago, had you ever heard of Zoom as a,
Right.
as a, as a conferencing? But
Yeah.
what Zoom did is made it easy to use, gave it away in some cases, and all of a sudden I have people telling me, "Out, let's do a Zoom call," even though they don't use Zoom.
Yeah.
So I think there's an
Yeah.
opportunity in this industry to create solutions, could be invoicing, could be payables, could be almost anything that has a name people can recognize. It makes it easy to install and implement. And all the work behind the scenes is absorbed by that vendor with whatever cool technology will work for them. And I think that's called leadership. And I think one thing this industry needs is more leadership.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't answer your question, Brian, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love,
I agree on that. The challenge, one of the things that the better technologies, as technology has improved, right? One of the things that we used to incur, Paul certainly remember this, Brian, you remember this, is it used to be professional services dollars was 4-1, the software. Then it was 3, then it was 2. And I'm here to tell you that today, my goodness, I think if it's 1-1, you're outpricing yourself, right?
Yep.
It better be easy. I better be able to
Yes.
get this thing up and running like in a week, right? Now, we all know that's baloney, right? Because there's things that have to happen in the background, primarily integration, services, right, that need to be understood to optimize how it gets installed. It's not just about scanning the invoice and recognizing the invoice number. Good Lord, we've been doing that for 20 years. I
Hmm.
actually had an IDP vendor say to me, and Dave, we do something nobody else does. We capture radio buttons. Dude, we were doing that with microfilm. Shut up.
Yeah.
Right. So Paul's exactly right. This thing has to start to get packaged differently. And I've got people that call me on the side and ask me to help them with this to say, what are we doing? What are we doing wrong? Right. And to get to Paul's point, we need to stay away from focusing strictly on the technology, right? Downplay, the OCR capture stuff. Good Lord, if you can't do it at this point, go home, right? But how do I take your product and build it into my company's, my process to make everything better? People centric productivity improvements are a trend, an investment trend, because we're here talking about M&A. It's one of the top 5
Yep.
investment trends in our space. People centric productivity improvement. Well, what else do we do? We've been doing that, right?
Right.
And so how do I package it to fit into that trend? And quite frankly, guys, so many of these guys are technology wizards at these companies. They're really smart and not so smart on the marketing sales stuff. They ought to take Paul's class at the university. That's what I say. Yeah. Go fly there and take his class and learn how to market. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a pretty tough grader, though.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
but it's more than marketing. It's really producing that solution. It's not hype. It can't be hype because hype is gone now. If you don't
Right.
produce
Yeah.
quickly, they're going to find an alternative. So don't talk about speeds and feeds. Now, in certain countries, you may have to. It's very different outside the U.S.
Yeah.
But basically, talk like they used to say, create that solution vision. Here's what we can do for you, and here's how it'll change your life. And that's what everybody's looking for. How is it going to improve not only my operation, but me personally? Is it going to make my job better, easier, more rewarding? We forget about that today. We talk about speeds, feeds, technology, AI, all good stuff and all important stuff. But we forget about the human element of it and what it really means to somebody to implement your system. We need to make that easier and more compelling, in my opinion.
Paul could not be more right in that case. However, it's not ours, but the technology vendor, it's their own fault. Because if you go, the users go Google this stuff, right? And what do? They Google, like, what's one of the number one questions these guys get is, what's your read rate? You guys have heard this, right? Dumbest question ever, right? And when you ask me that, I already know you don't understand. And so I've got to bring that user, that customer, all the way back to the beginning to say, why would you ask me that? Right? Where'd you get that from? Right? And vendors have to get away from that. Right? We recognize 98% faster or whatever it is. Right? Forget that. Get back to what Paul's saying is, why would I even want to do this in the first place? Right? There's got to be a reason why we're going to do this, and you better get that down. And then say, oh, by the way, recognizing the document's a piece of cake. 1,000 vendors can do that. What we do is and then your story,
Yep. And getting back to M&A, and I don't know if Dave would agree with this, but the hardest thing we've had when we've had the opportunity to sell is what I'll call just technology. It's a very difficult sale in this marketplace for a couple of reasons. Companies say, well, hell, I can do that. Most can't, by the way, but nevertheless, they're going to say that, or the technical group will say that. And second of all, if you have technology without some payback or some track record that is successful, it's a very difficult sale. On the other hand, we have some companies that are, in fact, relatively small with terrific product, terrific earnings, focused on the market, and they're being sought all the time. So it's you'd almost think the opposite. Well, I want to get that core technology. I don't see that in what we do in the M&A marketplace as often, and it's much tougher.
Yeah, the only place I see that, Paul, is very strategic. It's usually private equity buyers that have a platform and they're looking for a plugin. Right.
Exactly.
So I don't really care about the revenue, any of that. I just want to save myself 2 or 3 years of development and plug it in. Right.
Yep.
Other than that, Paul's exactly right. Stay away from the technology. We have a process at Quorum where a client will give a presentation to all of us, right, our colleagues, right, and we give them feedback on it. And one of the key things, it's hard for technology vendors not to sell us the product, right? And we have to encourage them, please don't do that, right? You're here to sell the company, not the product, right? So that goes right in line. And our companies in our space need to learn how to do that. They only, instead of selling the company, they need to sell the problem and the solution, right? So
we have the approach, David, you've heard it more, that every company has a story. And it's not just the P&L, it's just not the balance sheet. There's a story to that company. By the way, some good and some bad, but nevertheless, it's a story. And I think, and David, I think you'd agree, our job in the M&A world is to be able to tell that story. And that story includes why it could be important for an acquirer. And I think I agree with David. Most companies cannot tell that story. And so I think the value we can add, as David just indicated, as he has, is to help them put that story together and understand the value they really have.
Exactly.
I would argue that the companies have gotten a little bit better at trying to sell the quarter-inch hole instead of the drill bit. But yeah, I mean, I would still agree that much more work needs to be done in that direction.
It's the old marketing statement, right? Sell the sizzle and not the steak. Right. So we need to sell the sizzle.
We have a statement in our space, armor piercing statement, right? When you tell me about your company, I should go, whoa, okay, I want to know more about that. Not, Okay, great. Here we go.
Here we go. Here we go again.
Please say the
So,
word OCR again. Yeah.
The telltale sign is you got three people in a company and you ask each one separately, what is your company all about? And if they all say the same thing, you've got a pretty tight company there, probably. In most
That's
cases,
great.
they don't.
That's
And you
great.
know they
Great.
really need some work on understanding what it is you're really
what?
providing to the marketplace, not
Yeah,
to one customer, but to the marketplace, because there
that's
is a
exactly.
difference.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's exactly
So,
right.
so speaking of sizzle, let's switch to the sizzliest of sizzly things, and artificial intelligence, right? So,
Yay.
I was having a hard time phrasing this question. So, it seems to me, I mean, I think last year we were talking about RPA, and RPA was like talking about, all things, marketing was all things to all people, and it's like it's a tiny, tiny little important thing, but a small thing. So AI is obviously a little bit more all-encompassing than RPA. I guess you could argue that maybe they're the same thing anyway, whatever. Um, but I mean, it feels like we're almost at the beginning stages of doing the exact wrong thing again, which is like giving AI guys shit ton of money, even if they don't do things very well, just because it's sizzle. And you're almost like killing progress that you've made with being able to incorporate RPA into successful implementations now. Do you see a problem with, you know, too much focus on AI, not enough focus on sort of the meat and potatoes of being able to get stuff done now, if that makes any sense?
But AI is such a broad term, and as David knows, you'll meet 100 companies that were AI companies, and you almost see 100 different versions of how it's
Mhm.
being used and how it's being implemented. So, you know, I view AI, even though it's probably looked poorly upon now, as another tool and an important tool, and one that can certainly have value,
Right.
but it's not a be all end all. It will not end the world as we see it, like some of the naysayers are saying. On the other hand, it offers potential. And frankly, I see a lot of that potential right now still untapped.
Yeah,
I don't know what you think, David, but
I agree. No, I agree. I think it's a little overplayed in certain areas, and Brian, I will uh, tell you, and Paul will attest to this for sure. Is investment companies make bad decisions. Don't think for a minute that they're all geniuses, because
So
we
you're
both
not
have
what?
an arm length of all the names like WeWork and more that have not gone well, right? So just because somebody puts in, a bank full of money, and it doesn't, what it does for me is I go read something about it. If I see the common sense in it, if I see the numbers, if I see why it makes sense, okay. If I see that, well, you just invested X because it has AI in it, I question your investment strategy. What are you doing? What are you going to do with it? So at the end of the day, it still comes
yeah,
down to what Paul started with: is what are you going to do with it? Like
Yeah.
if your AI and your IDP can start to predict based on this content what you do with that data, or it can start to read trends and say, hey, I've noticed over the last 3 months, these invoices created this trend or this, you might want to go look at this, to improve your cash flow, or hey, make sure you're getting your revenue recognition right or something. If it can do that, very helpful. But other than that, come on. The only thing you're doing at this point is reducing your implementation time, because my sample size could be small. It used to be 10,000 pages. Now you can do it in 10, whatever. Okay. But, is that worth $100 million? I don't think so. So there's still some, I think the jury's still out, to be honest with you, but
well,
there's,
I think
hey,
that
look, in the investment community, anything that says AI, you can get an audience right now. Guaranteed.
exactly.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, they're still in test mode. I mean, basically, everybody can take $100 million from an investor. The question is, can you put it to good and really develop something?
Yeah.
Or are we going to look back in 2 years and say, what happened to that $100 million? I mean, we've seen it in other technology areas. So
Yeah.
I think that's a big test now is, can you put it to practical use? And it really goes back, as David alluded to, is it going to enhance my solution? Is going to solve a problem for me
Right.
and internally make my life easier and better.
Yep.
If they use it to those ends, I think there's tremendous market for it. But I agree with David. We're in the embryonic stages of seeing how it can be utilized and how it can be implemented. But it is a hype word. I mean, I lived through the dot-com days when they were throwing money at everybody and
Yeah,
very few produced. I'm
yeah,
hoping that doesn't happen with AI because there are some very compelling use cases for it,
yeah.
but it has to be proven.
That's exactly it. This is almost a not exactly a replay, but things, you live long enough, right? You go through enough of this market, you start to see things that I fully go back to the web content management play of the late 90s, early 2000s. It was Jeffrey Moore's, living in a tornado concept for sure, which made no sense at all. None, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars getting thrown at companies. And at the end of the day, it just went because somebody offered it for free. And the same thing's going to happen with RPA. Same thing.
But on the other hand, David, I don't think you or I would turn down a client who got an offer for 50 times revenue or 50 times EBITDA. So,
Oh no, no,
we
no.
we play both sides of that a little bit. We're going to drive the best value for our clients that we can. Hey, this is AI. You got to pay a lot for this.
I'm happy that on that $100 million investment, I'm happy to be sitting next to the CEO on his new yacht doing a Zoom presentation about, how we're late with the new product release. I'm fine with that. I have no problem. Yeah.
No qualms about about that, right?
We,
So
we,
let
we
me,
do have ethics, but they.
if it gets you another sip of nice Macallan,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Ethics and
you know,
M&A, that's a comedy routine all by itself, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
well, we have a phrase we use a lot when a buyer approaches us, and the question is, do you have the ability to write a big check?
Yeah.
So if the answer is yes, they're a good
Keep
buyer.
going. Yeah. Yeah. If he said, let me call my mom, you should probably go home,
Right, right.
Yeah.
Or that could be me saying that. I don't know.
So let me. So I mean, I got sort of, I guess an answer, but not 100% of an answer for the question. Which somebody just asked it explicitly. Do you think the investor community, you two accepted because you're infallible, or are they going? Or are we going to make? Or are we going to see the same mistakes made with throwing money at AI as with our RPA and other technologies in the past?
So I would, from my perspective, you're going to see them throwing money at companies, but I think they're going to have a much tighter report card
Yeah.
on the progress being made and how it's being implemented. So I think investors are smart to look at these new technologies and invest in them if there's a right plan. But I also think they're not going to let it go wild as we've seen in the past with different technologies. I think we've all learned from that. Second, the economy, the inflation, fears of recession, I think are going to affect companies. They're going to keep a little bit tighter rein, with some exceptions, of course.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. Yeah, the investments are tighter, and investment firms will put somebody in, more times than they used to, right? And that's the watcher that's saying, no, you can't go buy a new BMW, right? You actually have to put the money in the business, and you have to deliver
Yep.
on our KPIs to move the company forward. We projected a 3x growth rate or whatever it is. You better be on track, or we'll go find somebody who can.
I
It's
agree.
on.
I agree. I think they've been through it. They've
Mhm.
seen what works. They've seen that doesn't work, and I think most investors have learned from that.
Yeah.
And while they can be generous, they're also going to be demanding, which they should be, by the way. It's
Yeah.
their
Right.
money.
And by the way, there's a lot of net new investment companies that have been funded, right? They're coming out of the woodwork, right?
Yep.
And they too have to be very careful about what they do with this money, because they're not Thoma Bravo. They can't afford to
Right.
make a $1 billion mistake, right? So they get very tight on the reins. So yeah, that's happening too.
So less screwed McDuck money bags and more trust but verify.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I would
That's right.
say that's good. That's
Great,
probably
great,
accurate.
great, great
Yeah.
statement.
So let's switch over to sort of digital transformation and consolidation, because we've all been expecting the industry to sort of consolidate, but digital transformation sort of subsumes sort of ECM and RPA and IDP and
Yep.
knowledge management and whatever other, all that content management stuff you want to throw in, governance, all that.
Yeah.
So as these AI companies start to proliferate and become purchased and become part of other companies, do you see do you see this, instead of consolidation, there's sort of a growth of vendors in the space?
You know,
Paul.
I think if you look over history, there has always been consolidation in different industries, not speaking ours necessarily. And usually one of the byproducts of consolidation is more vendors. Surprisingly, I mean, you would think, okay, they're consolidating, we're losing key vendors. Then 10 pop up who were former employees or former technologists. And I think that trend will continue. I think consolidation will occur hopefully even faster because companies are realizing, okay, we need this technology, we have to find it, but the marketplace doesn't wait for 3 or 4 years anymore for you to develop a product because someone else has it. So therefore, I think it puts acquisitions at the top of a good strategy. They should be thinking about what do we need to fill our gaps. And by doing that, I think we're going to see continued consolidation in all areas, including AI. We've seen some where major companies say, "Hey, AI is going to be important. We need to embed this into our portfolio," and we've seen some acquisitions made for those reasons. We're going to see a lot of smaller acquisitions of AI, smaller AI companies for the same reasons. So I think the cycle is almost continuous. You'll see consolidation probably a little more rapidly, I would suspect, over the next 3 years, but you'll also see new vendors.
And then we sort of go broad and then consolidation and then broad and then
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, frankly,
I think so.
I've been surprised that the MFP manufacturing companies haven't been more involved in this space of acquiring this technology, our companies, right? I mean, now Rico buys Fujitsu, which is not shocking, but interesting, right? And I say, okay, so we have a hardware. All it did was move the hardware from one vendor to another, right? But where's
Right.
the strategic innovation? That's the question I'm
Well,
having, right?
you see Rico having success, I feel, with DocuWare, for example.
Yeah,
And that's, I think, a positive thing. You see
it
others
is.
struggling, buying services companies who may or may not be successful, which,
Yeah,
I'm not questioning whether it's a good strategy or not, but they're starting to try things. But, it's
yeah,
really tough for those companies because they are not typically rapid investors. They
yeah,
take a long time to plan and think. And the problem with that is the innovation cycle today has accelerated. So
right.
it's going to take you a year and a half to make a decision. Things may have changed in that time, and the decision is no longer valid. So I think there's a
Yeah.
challenge there for all those companies.
I actually think it, leaning toward Paul's point, it kind of creates an opening. Let me see if I can explain this right. Highland, via Thoma Bravo, created like a platform and then plugged in technologies, right? And by all measurements, it's been successful. I mean, Highland's been very successful. It's a great investment for Thoma Bravo. Thoma Bravo did that with Kofax. I think they did a good job of building something around creating, taking Kofax from a scanning company, a capture, to an infrastructure play, if you will, right? I mean, I think if you walk into a meeting now and called Kofax a capture company, Reynolds Bish would throw something at you, right? Right. So, what dominant player do we have in the space now? OpenText is kind of off on their own thing. They have components, right? But I think it could create an opening for a platform play. I maybe that's a speculation on my part, but I do see there has to be some more. You can't have 400 IDP companies out there. You can't
Right.
survive. So I said this at last year's conference. I absolutely firmly believe more of the line of business applications are going to purchase this technology and build it in because they know it's needed, right? And if all of the technologies start to look and feel the same, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, uh, what do I care if the technology I buy and plug in is fill in the blank, any one of them, right? I still provided my customers, to Paul's point, with a solution they need. I can capture unstructured content and feed it into my Workday, ServiceNow, whatever it is, and you don't care what the name of that product is. You don't care anymore, right?
I,
So
I think
that's going to
somebody
happen.
I had a
There was an
conversation
old
with.
day, you guys
Yeah.
remember way back when the old saw was, you'll never make a mistake choosing IBM back in the 60s. Remember?
Yeah.
We don't have that situation today.
No.
And I agree with David. It's going to get more competitive. I do think the nimble, young, upstart companies are going to form a niche because they can provide an overall solution, probably what a company is now paying for annual maintenance.
Yeah.
And that will always be there. And then those companies at some point will either succeed or they'll be acquired. So
Yeah.
I think we're seeing history repeat itself to a great extent. All the terminology is different, all the names are different,
Right.
but these cycles we've seen before, and
I
I
agree.
do think they'll continue. Except I think the pace will be faster because technology is changing faster.
I agree.
Oh,
100%. 100%.
yay, that's great. Faster pace. That's just what we all need, right?
Not me, not me.
I'm saying you're semi-retired, Paul.
Yeah.
I
So
wish
Phil,
I wish I knew that.
Phil, I just want to end with one question about just from your point of view as advisors for people merging and acquiring. What are some indicators of success that you would say would if a AI company is purchasing an IDP or vice versa? What are some things that you look for? You've mentioned some of this already. A targeted solution, a story, comprehensive story. But what are some things that you look for that indicate success?
I think Dave hit on it before. What is your vision? What is the vision that you have for this product? And is it useful to, I hate to say it, is it useful to humanity or to a small company or whoever it might be? Because, and David, I think you've seen it too. We run into many companies that really have no vision at all. They have a product and they have technology, but while they sell it, they almost don't know what the potential is. So the companies that really produce a compelling vision and can execute on a vision will always be successful, in my opinion.
Right.
Unfortunately, that is probably 10% of the companies we run into.
Yeah, that's it. It's being able. It still is being able to differentiate yourself in the minds of, well, one, investors, but investors are influenced by customers, right? I mean, if there's a customer trend, there's an opportunity to a total available market, you're going to see investors, gravitating toward that movement. What is that? And I need to find a way to put myself in that arena, and I'm going to do that by creating compelling stories about, one, what we're intending to do and how our customers are benefiting from this. When I help a client, and they're giving this presentation and they're giving testimonials, you said this earlier, you have to provide that story in what was their challenge or their problem, what solution did you offer them, what benefits did they get or are they receiving from that, and why did they choose you? Those four components have to be in your story to me, or you're just another blah, blah, blah product telling me how awesome you are, right? And and when I help companies, even consulting on the sales side, I try to help sales. When you're giving a presentation to a customer, please don't tell them how awesome you are. Tell them the awesome job that your company did to help your customer do A, B, and C. They don't care about you, and the investors are saying, we care about what we can do with your company. I don't care that you spend 80 hours a week and sleepless nights and sleeping in a trash can. I don't care, right? What I care about is, how do I take my whatever 10, 20, 30, 50 million and make it 150 million? That's what I want to know, right? So convince me by telling me I see the vision of where that should go. And that's where a lot of companies fall short.
I agree. I remember 30 years ago, I think I was still at Kodak at the time, we had a session with Dr. Lynn Phillips from Stanford, who was kind of looked at as the father of the value proposition notion. And nothing's changed. I mean, basically, he said, listen to your customer, spend a day in the life of the customer, understand what their problem is, and then build your solutions or build your sales to that problem. And it affects not only the company, but it does affect the person. And frankly, over 30 years, I haven't seen that need change because, and the challenge we have, to your point, if you sometimes when you ask a company the 4 questions that Dave mentioned, they don't have answers.
Right.
And so how can they tell their customer that your life is going to be better by choosing our solution if they don't understand it themselves? And I think we run into that a lot. And you know, great products. Some companies have really great products, but I always used to say, I had a salesman at Kodak. We had a Comstar device, which was a hard sale to begin with. And this guy just sold it all the time.
Yeah.
You got to know him. It was almost scary how little he knew about the product technically, but he knew what it did for users. And he was the most successful guy we ever had. So it was a lesson, and it's a lesson we learned that you really have to understand the need of the customer. And sometimes it's totally the opposite of what you're thinking. Going in.
Kind of loops back around to what we started off by talking about, which is sort of a marketing problem of identifying your core audience and what you do for that audience, and then providing your solution for that audience. I've been rereading some marketing books, and I'll go year 30 and go back 100 years to Claude Hopkins, copy editing.
Sure.
And you know, he's the guy that came up with the idea to put the foaming agent in toothpaste because it gave an indication that you were brushing your teeth. And it's just like that one little tweak, but it's the same thing. Identify your customer, identify your audience,
and honestly, and I think David would agree, M&A is no different. We are selling a product.
That's right.
And we have to know what the product is and what it can do and sell it properly to the buyer. So we like to give a lot of mystique to M&A, all these financial terms and everything else. But I think it's still another sales process. In fact, what we do before we even go into a process, we do evaluation analysis for a potential client. And many times they'll say, well, geez, if you can sell me for that, let's go. Or many times they'll say, well, that's not enough. But you have to know what their needs are. The other thing I'd say, and hopefully David would agree, you can't convince somebody to sell the company if they're not ready. So M&A is a process. It's clearly a process and not a point event. And, you know, we've had some people come back after 10 years and say, you know, I've kept all your information. I'm ready now. Which is amazing to me that anybody would keep any email from me that long, but it happens.
I just had it happen. I started just calling on somebody last year, and the business changed, the climate's changed, and he's like, you know, you're the only one that has stayed in touch with me and actually gave me content and helped me understand the market, which, you know, for young salespeople out there, hello. And finally came back and said, you know, I get these calls from these guys all the time, and nobody seems to care about me. They just, they keep telling me how awesome they are, right? And so Paul's exactly right. It's still a sales cycle, but you know, you as the M&A advisor have to, because there's so many of us, right? You have to give them a compelling story as to why you. But Paul doesn't really do anything different than we do. We all, you know, you have a client, you have to have a buyer. There has to be something that makes sense for both parties, right? You're basically the broker, the advisor to make that transaction happen. It's not,
Sometimes we have to deliver bad news, right? You know, we have to be honest. That's the key.
You do. That's why
I was fortunate.
Yeah. That's why, you know, it's so helpful to do when you do business with guys like Paul, right? Handshake people are so hard to find, and he's one of them. And that's what you want to be, right? You want to be that kind of person in this space. And I promise you, just like in the IDP space, there are people that are not that, right? Their product doesn't really work, right? It doesn't really fit. They think it does, but it doesn't, right? And the same thing is here. But these investments in this space, you have to be careful with your client. You have to set the right expectations with your client because somebody said, well, this guy just got, I'll go to the store, $45 million, right? I should get 45 million. Should you
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
No, you shouldn't. And here's why. And as Paul said, here's the bad news. I'm sorry, but if you're not willing to do that, this probably isn't the right space for you. You won't
Right.
be successful long term.
And it's listening to the customer. And I benefited. I probably didn't do well in sales training at Kodak. My first sales territory was Pittsburgh. And
Oh,
I'm
you poor
selling,
bastard.
and I'm giving a pitch to a guy in the warehouse district, and I say, microfilm is great. And buy our microfilmer. It captures everything. You'll never lose anything. He stopped me right there, and he said, in a little bit of an accent, sometimes we like to lose things. And that was the best lesson I ever heard in marketing. Listen to your customer.
Yeah.
And I wasn't listening. I was pitching.
Boy, haven't we all done that? Yeah.
Well, I think with that, I think we've gone a little bit longer than even I expected with the two of you. I look forward to Ralph trying to wrangle you two at the presentation at the event September 7th.
Yes.
Hope to see both of you there, and as always, thank you both very much for your time.
Look forward to it. Always.
Yeah, I
good.
look forward to it. Great talking to you. And David, good chatting with you again.
Always good seeing you, Paul.